All right, looks like we are live. And I want to welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny, and I am your host for tonight's presentation titled Naturalistic Explanations of the Universe and Life Debunked. And I am thrilled to once again have Sal Giardina here with me for this important program. It is a privilege, as always, to have Sal here to address these important topics. He has been an incredible blessing to this ministry, and I do want to highly recommend that everybody check out his previous shows that he's done with us. You can find a link to those programs in the description box and also directly on our website, standingfortruthministries.com. There you can also find his latest series that he's done with us, All Creation Speaks. Sal, that was an excellent series, and I highly recommend people check that out. And so, Sal, before I give you a formal introduction, I do want to ask you, how are you doing tonight, my brother?
I'm blessed, doing great. And as usual, it's a privilege, Donnie, to be able to address your audience on this program, Standing for Truth.
I appreciate your time, Sal. I always look forward to your presentations. They're always comprehensive, and we always have a solid audience Q&A. And so to the audience, I do want to let you know how tonight's format will be. So we're going to make it interactive. And what I mean by that is Sal is going to give 3 rounds of presentations. They can range anywhere between 20 minutes to 30 minutes. We're not overly strict on that. But after each round of presentation, we're going to do about 20 minutes of questions. And we want to make sure that the questions are as related as possible to what he is presenting on in each portion here. And so please, if you do have a question, make sure you're tagging me either at Standing for Truth or at Donny, and that way I won't miss your question. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And so with that, Sal, I am going to give you a formal introduction, and my chat mods are also going to provide links to where they can find your website and books and so on. So, Sal, if you wanted to get your first slide up, and from there, we can go through our intro. And so, our guest tonight, Sal Giardina, he is multidisciplined. Sal has educational and professional background in engineering and applied earth sciences. He has a BS in mechanical engineering and an MS in geology. He is a former registered professional geologist from the state of Arizona, the founder and president of New Creation Ministries, Inc., the author of Switched on Schoolhouse, online interactive 4th through 12th grade science curriculum. He's also the author of the book titled In the Beginning, God or Dirt. Sal has 8 professional publications in engineering geology, and he is the author and co-author of more than 20 technical reports for industry, private firms, and U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Agency. He is also a professional pilot and scientist astronaut candidate. He was selected by NASA for 5 days of interviews at LBJ Space Center out of 8,500 initial candidates. And so, in other words, Sal, you are more than qualified, my brother, to speak and present on these topics. And so, Sal, again, thank you so much for all your hard work defending the faith and your time for tonight's presentation. Sal, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Donnie. Multitudes are not aware that humanity is involved in a global war. It's a cosmic battle of worldviews. And this cosmic battle, ladies and gentlemen, overshadows all other human endeavors. Consequently, or consciously or unconsciously, your fundamental worldview affects every aspect of your life's endeavors. There's a real battle waging to control your frame of reference, folks. Your worldview actually influences how you interpret the issues which confront you every day, your decisions and your responses. Ultimately, your eternal destiny could become a casualty of this war. Now, creation and evolutionary scientists examine the same fossils and rock structures. I'm asked, semi-regularly, what type of evidence do you have as a creation scientist as opposed to everybody else out there, the evolutionary community? Well, we don't have anything different. We examine the same fossils, the same rock structures as everybody else. We have the same data to work with. We use the same telescopes, microscopes, and lab equipment, basically. But we come to completely different conclusions than the general worldview out there. Why is that? Well, it just depends. Your worldview depends upon the lens you look through. If you're looking through at the data through an evolutionary lens, you look at the rock strata and you interpret them as being hundreds of millions of years old. And your worldview through which you are looking at causes you to have a certain interpretation of the data. But if you look through a biblical worldview at the same data, you come to a completely different conclusion, you see, because you're looking at the same data, but you have on a different set of lenses. Your worldview is based on the biblical worldview. Scientists would say that your presuppositions in which you're coming in to investigate the evidence are different. Your presuppositions is going to determine what kind of a worldview you're going to get. If you're looking through an evolutionary worldview at the same set of data, you will get a completely different conclusion. Today, folks, man attempts to decide truth for himself. He doesn't believe in absolute truths as indicated by scripture. It boils down to either you believe God determines truth or man determines truth. I believe today's presentation should be contemplated very carefully out there, as it emphasizes the implication of each individual's belief system which they have embraced. There are two worldviews competing for your soul and your allegiance. Which set of lenses determines your judgments? You've already been exposed to the world-centered worldview, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. The worldwide media, with nearly unlimited mega dollars to finance their agenda, has been going on for decades and decades and indoctrinating people for everything from grade school up to the university level. And they have almost unlimited funds to do so. So you know what that worldview is already. A humanistic, atheistic avalanche of false information under the misappropriation of a historical science. Now, remember, we're not talking about operational science here. We're not talking about issues of science that are used to examine your, to make your cell phones and to send probes to Mars, okay? We're talking about the issues regarding historical science, the age of the Earth, and the history of the Earth, and the origin of life itself. So as a result, our culture has morphed into a post-Christian world. Multitudes do not perceive the biblical worldview as relevant. They have been satisfied with the theories of many self-centered men, not realizing that these theories are actually refuted by the current state of scientific evidence. If in the past you had some kind of an excuse to believe in these theories, as awesome as they may seem, there is no excuse any longer. We're at a point in science where these ideas of evolutionary science, evolution of the human race and of the cosmos itself, life itself, they have been scientifically discredited already. We are at a point where we know that. Naturalistic explanations of the universe and life will be debunked to a limited extent today as we have time. We're going to look at 3 topics: cosmic evolution, abiogenesis, meaning that life can start from non-life, non-living chemicals, and Darwinian evolution. They all violate the established laws of science. We're then going to go on for a short while to look at living systems and how they are directed by information, which can only originate from an intelligent source. And then lastly, tonight, we'll talk about original biomolecules recovered from assumed ages of rocks and fossils that are up to 550 million years old, according to the geologic column. But the proposed age of these fossils is inconsistent with known principles of organic chemistry and physics. So we'll go on to the first session right now. Folks, the undisputed long-term results of life on this earth, whether it's organic molecules or inorganic molecules, this is the undisputed result. We know that. And as much as man attempts to slow this down in the sense of even engineered systems, with our best science and engineering, we cannot keep these systems operating continuously. And this is the imaginary long-term events. Called molecules to man.
The established laws of science preclude eternal matter or a Big Bang creating energy and matter from nothing. The established laws of science also show us clearly the impossibility of an evolutionary perpetual motion of the organic world towards a state of increasing order. Why? Because the laws of thermodynamics stand without exception in this universe. This is called a universal trend of matter. We're all familiar with it. Man and the entire ordered universe was created at the beginning with an order, and over time continued to deteriorate. This is complex creation followed by deterioration. It's observed reality without exceptions. And it conforms perfectly to the first and second laws of thermodynamics. It looks like this. This is reality. It's the undisputed long-term results of all natural events, whether those natural events are in the organic world or the inorganic world. This is the inevitable results given enough time. However, man has been deceived into warping the common knowledge of this incontestable universal decay into an imagined evolutionary process. This imagination of evolution looks like this. You are told that at some time in the far distant past, there was a singular event in which perhaps hydrogen gas then expanded or exploded rapidly and synthesized itself over billions of years, culminating in man himself. This evolution by complex integration of matter is we refer to as molecules to man. However, it's a random accidental chemical assembly yielding increasing order, you are told. But It is never reproduced in a lab, and it is simply a theory which lacks a viable mechanism and is contrary to known physical laws, as we just pointed out. Basically, you're told, given enough time, all things are possible, as if time itself could create anything. It looks like this again in the students' textbooks. You have seen it. This is called the phylogenetic tree of life, in which it is asserted that life started from non-living chemicals, referred here as dirt, formed the first living cell, and then from that integrated itself into all living systems on the earth today. Who is wise? Let him give heed to these things and consider the loving kindness of the Lord.
Folks, this is a diagram showing what was just explained to you, a universal trend of matter, which the proposed trend, you have two choices: biblical creation, which corresponds to reality and the known laws of science and what we see around us every day of our lives. Or you could choose a naturalistic explanation, which is completely contrary to the known laws of science. Now, to help you out a little bit, folks, the absolute basis of refuting any model that is presented to you, or an idea or a theory, a speculation, is simply by demonstrating that it violates a mathematical, chemical, or physical law of science. Now, we're not talking about theories or principles. The laws of science have been established, and they are as close to what we would call in this universe absolute truth, because there are no exceptions to the fundamental laws of science that have been established. This is how we could send a person to the moon. We've just recently launched, actually landed and retrieved a probe that landed on a asteroid, if you could believe it or not, took a sample and was taken back to Earth. It landed last week. Absolutely amazing. We could do this because of the laws of science. When I teach people how to fly high performance aircraft, as I did in the military and civilian, I teach them basic laws of science, which are absolutely directed towards safely flying an aircraft. They cannot try to violate these laws because you will get in trouble very quickly. So when a theory violates a actual law of science, it is close to proving it, I say quote unquote, proving it as being false. We can't prove too many things in this world on an absolute basis, but when something violates a law of science, that is close to an absolute proof that you can get, and you could immediately be justified in rejecting it. One of the things that engineers are sometimes faced with, as an example of violating a law of science, is that we have people once in a while propose a perpetual motion machine. Now, we know that this violates the second law of thermodynamics, and such a machine is impossible. A perpetual motion machine is any kind of a machine in which a person proposes that once he gets it started, he could back off with no further energy input or mechanism. It will just continue to operate forever. And this is basically what evolutionary biologic evolution is, simply a biologic perpetual motion machine, which is not possible in this universe. If you're a professional engineer like myself and someone comes up and says, I have invented a perpetual motion machine, it's an automatic reject, because it is not possible in this universe. There are many different kinds have been proposed: electromechanical, electrical, magnetic, solar. You see these advertised sometimes on Facebook, on some of the agencies on the internet that advertise that, boy, if you buy this machine, it's going to generate electricity for you basically for free once you get it going. That's impossible. Save your money. No matter what the device is, it's simply not possible in this universe. Here's something that you're told. The direction of mankind. It's very popular these days, especially now that artificial intelligence is in the forefront of news these days. You know, we've had a major breakthrough, step up in our ability to program computers, high-speed computers now. They take very special computers with artificial intelligence. Of course, we've been using that in general computers for a long time, but there's been a great step up, an increase in artificial intelligence lately. Many companies are scrambling to incorporate it in their business. But in the evolutionary scheme of things, we're told that longevity, fitness, and intelligence of the human race is on an exponential curve, and we're way up in here, and we're going to reach a singular event, possibly with the help of AI these days, in which mankind will be able to solve all its problems and basically extend life almost indefinitely. And this is what's being promulgated on the human race right now in the schools and everything like this. It's simply a science fiction scenario at best. But the biblical account of historical longevity is shown in a plot here in my book. In the beginning, God or Dirt. I've published the book if you'd like to get a copy of this on my website. And I've plotted the biblical account of longevity. I believe this is about the most accurate plot you will find anywhere. And I explain in my book why I believe it is probably the most accurate plot. Most plots you see from most researchers and biblical creationists, etc., plot a smooth exponential curve from the worldwide flood, whereby longevity, that is lifespan, is reducing with a smooth exponential curve. I don't believe it is a smooth exponential curve. There was a drastic drop due to the severe changes in the environment after the flood. Then we had a genetic bottleneck. This is explained in my book because only 3 couples then were reproducing the human race. That is the children of Noah and their wives, the sons of Noah and their wives. And then after that, we had Babel, dispersion of the human race, which was another somewhat caused a genetic drift and somewhat of a genetic bottleneck. And then from there, we have a smooth curve of declining longevity. So we're at the 6,000 years of humanity. This is basically reality. This is an imagination and a science fiction scenario, thinking that man is growing in intelligence and fitness and longevity. The Fundamentals of Classical Thermodynamics was published many years ago by Gordon and Richard Sonntag. It's called The Fundamentals of Classical Thermodynamics. They're up to about their 10th edition. Many universities use this as a textbook for engineers and scientists. And here's what these authors had to say in their opening foreword or introduction. they said the final point to be made is that the second law of thermodynamics and the principle of the increase in entropy have philosophical implications. However, the authors see the second law of thermodynamics as man's description of the prior and continuing work of a creator, who also holds the answer to the future destiny of man in the universe. So many of these theories, like biologic evolution and the long ages of the earth, just simply are anathema to the fundamental classic thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics. And the authors of this book agree to a great extent. If you're interested out there in knowing more of thermodynamics and the development of order, because it is so important to understand that it shows you why that the earth is not millions of years old. Everything from day one is in a state of deterioration, as we know. Just park your car outside, and a few years, if you do nothing to it, it turns into a rust bucket, right? Okay, before we go on to all the second part shown here, what we could do is have a discussion for about 20 minutes. I'll entertain some questions if you have them.
Okay, Sal. Very, very good so far. And we do have several questions coming in already. So, as always with the audience, I appreciate how engaged you are in these important presentations. And so, let's start right from the beginning. Doki Doki Bible Club question for Sal. What do you think of the James Webb Space Telescope findings about young spirals and such?
Well, that is a tremendous technological breakthrough. This space telescope, the James Webb, it's just recently been basically sending back data, and but like this telescope and all the other probes that we've sent out into the solar system, folks, when they come back and transmit data back to the earth, and they've been doing this now for about 20 or 30 years, okay, various probes. We've sent probes that have just whizzed by all our major planets in the solar system, and some of them have gone, actually now have just reached just beyond the limits of what we know as our solar system, beyond Pluto. And every time they send back data, you'll see in the headline, scientists are shocked. Scientists, are amazed. They don't understand why this data is coming back the way it is, because it does not conform to the standard cosmic idea that the planets have evolved from the sun, a dust cloud of the sun over the last 4 billion years or so. The data does not support that, nor does the James Webb Telescope data findings support that. And everything we see in the universe from hard data indicates a relatively young universe, which can correspond to the biblical record of 6,000 years of Earth history.
Amen. Well said. So, if I understand correctly, what they're observing with this James Webb Space Telescope is your galaxies that are supposed to be hundreds of millions to billions of light years away look just as mature, fully formed, and functioning as some of the closest galaxies.
Yes, the galaxies don't appear, the spiral arms, to be justified by hundreds of millions of years of age.
Yeah. Because you'd expect them to be less formed, less mature, if this was supposedly just moments after the Big Bang.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a young Earth creationist expectation and prediction. Here's a follow-up from Doki Doki. He says, how old was the supposed age of the universe when you went through school?
Well, when I went through school, they didn't discuss the age of the Earth too much, but I guess it's becoming more and more of an issue, you know. And when I went through school, they didn't discuss it. That is elementary school. Of course, when I went to my graduate work in geology at Syracuse University, I mean, on day one, I mean, they're trying to convince you that the Earth and its fossil record was formed 4.7 billion years ago. I mean, that is indoctrinated into you even as a university graduate student from day one. But if you go back in historical science, you'll see that when you start with James Hutton and Charles Lyell in the late 19th century, they started out with claiming the Earth was like a few million years old, million. Then they went to 10 million, then 50 million. And in the last 100 years, the idea of the Earth's age from secular standpoint has just been increasing and increasing and increasing about every 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. And it feels like with these James Webb results, as we were discussing, that your furthest galaxies essentially look mature. They look created. They're going to have to increase the age of the universe again. I've even heard of some being willing to double the age of the universe to something like 25 billion years.
One thing you can be assured of regarding the age of the Earth, folks, is that the Bible has a timeline of Earth history from creation to Christ. It is rarely taught in the churches, but has been as definitely established that from creation to the birth of Christ is 4,000 years. There's no way to insert into Scripture extra thousands or millions of years. No possible way. There is a tight timeline. It's been determined by many scholars. Even Sir Isaac Newton has helped to determine the timeline. You know, brilliant men have worked on this. But my point is this: once that timeline was established by God and given to us in the Bible, it has never changed. Year after year, century after century, it always been the same.
And the Bible claims to be the history book of the universe, Sal. And so it makes some very specific predictions, expectations, and retrodictions. And as we can see, as time goes on, the Bible is always being confirmed more and more as being true. And so, okay, here's the next question we have from Brother Sid. How can we give atheists supernatural evidence when philosophical naturalism excludes any supernaturalism?
Well, naturalism, by definition, it's just by definition, by a mindset, a mental construct that there is no place for the supernatural or scripture in the world of science. So it's just excluded by a mental construct or by definition.
Very good. So the next question here, actually, George Bond, excuse me, he gives a gift, a super chat. Appreciate it, George. And I think it's more of a comment than a question, but we'll work through it. And if you wanted to speak to it, Sal, feel free to do so. So George says, first and second laws of thermodynamics are considered so fundamental that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office will not consider patent applications that claim to violate them unless a working model is provided. Any thoughts on that, Sal?
Yeah, well, that's a great quote. I'm going to have to copy that for myself because that's exactly what I said in my last slides. When a person comes to a professional engineer, or a scientist who knows anything about the second law of thermodynamics, and they propose any kind, they try to get a patent or trademark, or try to propose that they've invented a machine which violates those laws, see, as it says right there. Okay, the patent office is just going to throw it in the circular file. They're not even going to consider it, because you cannot violate a law of science and think you're going to make any kind of a device or machine that's going to work. It's just not possible in this universe.
In simple terms, Sal, is the first law of thermodynamics the reality that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed?
Yes, it's the conservation of matter and energy, and that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed in our current universe. It can be converted from one form to another, but it cannot be created or destroyed. It's conserved. And we know that principle is used to design all kinds of devices and engines. In chemistry, you might remember, you have the reactants on one side of your equation, right? Then you have a arrow showing that the reactants then will form products. And the mass of the reactants is always equal to the mass of the products. If you remember that, that's basic. That's the conservation of mass. In fact, you could determine what the subscripts and the number of products that will be produced once you know the mass and you know the products of a chemical reaction. They have to equal what was in the original mass. It's the conservation of energy.
Great response. So correct me if I'm wrong, us as creationists, we don't have a problem with that or a violation to that, because we would say matter and energy was introduced from an outside force, outside the universe itself. But those that hold to naturalism, do they then have to argue in many ways that matter and energy are eternal?
They'll have to argue it's eternal, or which is popular today. Eternal matter and energy has been completely refuted by the first and second law of thermodynamics. But because of that, they kick the can down the road. And what is popular today is the idea is that matter and energy can be created from, hold your seat now, get ready, can be created from nothing.
Right. Yeah.
They actually tried to convince that all the matter and energy from the start of the singular event of the Big Bang was created from nothing. Now, if you want to believe that, you're welcome to. God created you to make your own decisions, but it has nothing to do with the world of science. The world of science will not back you up.
Right. Evolutionists, they hope, dream, and imagine. I mean, something came from nothing. So my question is, do they attempt to redefine what nothing is, Sal? Because when I think of nothing, I think of what rocks dream of. Absolutely nothing. But do they try and say, well, nothing really, it has to do with, I've heard them talk about quantum fluctuations and things like that. Sal, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, because like the professor at ASU, he wrote a book, Matter and Energy from Nothing. He tried to convince people that you can get matter or energy from nothing. He really tried to convince people, but it's just a bunch of euphemistic phrases which are totally inappropriate. His nothing is not an absolute nothing. Right. His nothing starts with quantum theory, quantum energy, that is minute particles, subatomic particles, which already exist and are energized. So his nothing is not an absolute nothing, but if you can't read through the between the lines, you could be duped.
Right. And that's why we promote, and you promote, critical thinking. Because with a lot of their claims, I've heard them say matter and energy can come into existence from nothing because of the law of gravity. Well, you have to
Gravity
read
isn't nothing.
right. So you have to read between the lines, as you've said, to realize just how pseudoscientific and false that is. And so my follow-up question then, the second law of thermodynamics in simple terms is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, the law of increasing entropy, the fact that things are winding down, losing energy, usable energy over time.
Yes, this is what we see every day around us from day one, from the day you're born to the day you die. All we see is confirmation of the deterioration of everything on this earth into simpler forms. Let me just ask you, Donnie, are we at the 20 minutes?
Good question. I've been timing it. We're at about the 14-minute mark. So I think we got a few minutes
Oh,
for a
okay.
couple more
All right.
questions. So I guess I'm curious, because if the second law of thermodynamics is saying things are winding down, and you've demonstrated in your presentation, especially with your graph there, that if things are winding down, you can wind them back up to a starting point of least increasing entropy. But wait a minute, if the first law of thermodynamics says that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, then that would have to be the starting point. That would have to be the point where matter and energy was brought forth from an outside source.
Exactly. And scientists today, I've shown on previous programs, if you want to get into the weeds of this a little bit more on previous programs, which you mentioned are available from Standing for Truth. I've shown scientists at a conference of a major scientific conference, and they are now again kicking the can down the road. They admit freely that the universe, the cosmos, had to start from something, and what they're calling it is, they're saying that it emerged. That's their new word. It emerged from information. Information. They're actually on track.
Yeah, right.
They're on track. See, they recognize that it cannot create itself. It has to have a creative beginning, and it emerged from information. They never tell you where that information came from, and we're going to cover that in the next section here.
Very good, brother Sal. I'm looking forward to it. George Bond has a follow-up question, $10 super chat. Appreciate the support, George. He says, or asks, if the universe is expanding, as your naturalist would say, then what is it expanding into?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's
We're not sure that it really is expanding. Really, that's based on the redshift, and as we look through our telescopes and are able to measure the redshift of the light coming from these interstellar stars and planets and such. Not planets, the stars and the galaxies and such. And even now, the so-called redshift, which has been used as the basis of thinking that the universe is expanding, is being questioned.
yeah, these seem more of problems for the naturalist explanation. And so I'm not going to be able to get through all these questions, but some I can tell are relevant to your next part of your presentation. And so I'll save a couple of these. You can answer this one, Sal, because you had the graph up there that essentially
Yes.
shows the exponential decay curve from creation. You have Adam and Eve. A couple thousand years later, you have a
Yes.
bottleneck where the population's reduced to just 8, but 3 reproducing couples. So the question is, pertaining to this bottleneck, would that bottleneck have had negative effects on humans?
Yes, it did in a sense, because after the flood, of course, all human beings were born from 3 families, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, and therefore the genetic makeup, the genetic code of a man and woman coming together, as we know, and your genes and your chromosomes are made up of 2 sets from the man and the woman. But those sets, as marvelous as there were almost innumerable combinations from Adam and Eve, it is now dropped down to the combinations that are restricted to three families, basically. And geneticists, I'm not a geneticist itself, but I do study it as it pertains to biblical creation. And geneticists have shown that the entire human race now is basically comes from three women. Well, isn't that something? I mean, the genetic code, they show you, they've plotted it out. And there's basically three families of women through which the entire universe has come to this point. And so our ability to have tremendous variation and such, of course, combined with mutations which have accumulated over the centuries and the millennia, has had somewhat of a negative effect. And our longevity, that is our lifespan, has been reduced considerably, especially due to the genetic bottleneck at the flood.
What a convenient coincidence for the evolutionist that we've discovered, as you just pointed out. This is extraordinary evidence. You look at mitochondrial DNA, you have your three main haplogroups, L, M, and N, that all people today, women specifically, have descended from. And yet we have, as you pointed out, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their three wives.
Right.
To us, it fits perfectly. To the evolutionists,
it fits perfectly with the Bible. What the Bible tells you. Well, isn't that amazing, though? Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. And with that, Sal, great way to wrap up our first Q&A session. That is 20 minutes on the dot. And so we'll get into part 2, my brother. Excellent job answering those questions.
All right, we'll do it. What we're going to look at here is that all living systems, that is plant and animals, human beings, are directed by information which can only originate from intelligence. Now, if you were to ask an evolutionist to explain the origin of information in the DNA, I mean, this produces an incredible migraine for people who are evolutionary oriented. They simply cannot come up with an origin of information. Now, do not be confused, people out there. Do not be confused by explanations which sidestep the issue. See, once you ask an evolutionist to explain the origin of the information content in the DNA, this is the instructions, the programming of life. And once you ask them to explain that, they will try to sidestep the issue with attempts to explain the physical origin of DNA, or RNA, the physical origin of proteins, amino acids, organic molecules, mutations, natural selection. They obscure the answer. All of these answers they come up with are totally irrelevant. You want to know what is the origin of the information within the DNA, which is the programming of life, which was discovered in 1952 by Watson and Crick, one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century ever. In 1953, Dr. Francis Crick and James Watson unraveled the structure, the physical structure of the huge DNA molecule, which we now know stores the genetic information of life. Folks, when they first discovered this, it was amazing that they unraveled the actual chemical structure of it. But then it began to dawn on people's minds what it was that they really discovered. This was the code, part of the code of life, which instructs every cell in your body, every cell of a plant, animal, or human being to do what it was designed by God to do. It's the programming of it. of it. It's specific algorithms to produce life itself, and the enormity of the discovery, because up to that point we knew that an acorn grows into an oak tree, but we did not know how or why. How could it possibly form a huge tree? We now know that why the sperm in an egg can produce a baby, a child, after a relatively short time. It grows from 2 cells to billions of cells. They believe the average human body has, I think the number is about 10 billion cells in it that operate together and in concert to give you life. So all information of all life is contained within the basically the DNA. The existence of information in our universe stands as an absolute barrier to evolution and all of its tenets. The traditional concept of the universe, folks, is you've seen it in your textbooks, maybe for many, many years: time, space, and matter. But we now know that the information is a basic fundamental concept of the universe.
I bet you were never told in school that the existence of information in our universe stands as an absolute barrier to Darwinian evolution. Our current understanding of the universe acknowledges that information is a basic component of our universe, being as fundamental as time, space, and matter. And just as time and space, matter and energy are related, so also information only exists as a product of intelligence. You will not find information in the periodic table of the elements, nor does it originate in the chemistry lab by combining various chemicals. Why is that? Because information is non-material. It is not a material or chemical property of matter. Now we know that all living organisms and plants require software programming of DNA to operate. However, an honest person asking truth must answer the question, from where does this programming originate? Obviously, if information is non-material, then the information content of the DNA software cannot originate from the material world by natural physical evolutionary processes. Weigh a blank CD, then embed 700 megabytes of information on it, and then weigh it again. Wow, you'll find no increase in the weight. Look, information is created and transmitted by intelligent minds between people. But everything from paper to digital signals are just a means to communicate. Even this video is not really the source of the information being transmitted to you, is it? All life processes consist of the transfer of meaningful information. This requires a prearranged set of protocols, which are agreed upon by the sender and receiver. That's right, that's you and me, right now. Our language is actually an exchange of information, and it did not arise from natural physical laws. Just like your computer, a cell factory cannot open for business unless all the organic hardware and internal operations can be successfully booted up together by the information software. I believe that you can now understand that the proposed mechanisms of evolution, natural selection, and mutations are not the creators of information. Why evolution can not even create or enhance the software which directs all life. Consequently, it cannot be the cause of the origin or so-called progression of life. Anyone who disagrees with the conclusion that evolution is absolutely falsified by the fundamental existence of information in our universe must therefore demonstrate the initial origin of information from a purely material source. Think about the successive generations of Windows. Was this progress by natural selection? Obviously not. Numerous intelligent programmers were required. Likewise, the proposed relentless growth of the phylogenetic tree of life without intelligent programming is nothing more than an attempt to ascend to the Creator's throne. And where have we heard this before?
Okay, before we go on to our next session, we could take some questions from the audience.
Sal, again, a great second part to your presentation, and I appreciate this format. So let's get right into the question. So you talked about information theory. For us, we don't have a problem answering where did the information emerge from, but to the naturalist, where did information emerge from? Basically nothing, right, Sal? It would be their...
Right. Well, they have no answer. There are actually many scientists dealing with cosmology and astrophysicists are actually come to the conclusion, because they have to default to the first and second laws of thermodynamics, so again, they're either trying to convince you that life and matter has originated from nothing, whatever that means, totally illogical, and or some of them are saying the universe. See, they recognize that there has to be a source of life, of energy and matter that is beyond the physical universe. It transcends the physical universe. They're recognizing that from mathematics and science, that the physical universe had to originate from something that transcends the physical universe, is outside the universe, and they're coming as close as they can to saying that it emerged from information, because they recognize information runs everything of life in this universe. It runs everything. It's the computer program. But if you get anything tonight, folks, from this, what I briefly explained, and there's more on this if you go back to my previous presentations on this in more detail. But if you get anything tonight, is that information is not material. Evolution and biologic evolution, Darwinian evolution and all its tenets, trying to explain to you that life progresses through mutations and natural selection, etc. They are simply dealing with the physical makeup of the cells of your body, the physical construction of DNA. But the ordering of the code within that, you see, they avoid the question, where did the code come from? The information content which directs life, that is not material. And the idea of mutations, natural selection, have nothing to do with the origin of the code. The code only, any code whatsoever comes from an intelligent source. Bill Gates will certainly tell you he became one of the richest men on the face of the earth because he developed a code that everybody then was able to use computers without being a computer programmer by the Windows. He called it Windows, right? That was a code developed by man. And everything that operates today, including life itself, requires a code. And the only source of code or information is an intelligent source. Like what you are seeing right now and hearing right now, that information being conveyed to you did not come from nowhere. I spent a lot of time, an intelligent source, putting it together for you. Okay.
Amen. Excellent answer as always, Sal. Even if they had the basic building blocks of life, the question then becomes, how do they introduce specified information into
Exactly.
those? Because if I were to just randomly spill ink on a piece of paper, that's not going to organize itself into a message or any
Of
real
course.
specified information. So
Exactly.
there's multiple hurdles they have to overcome.
Right. And one way you could explain that, Donnie, is when you said, if I just spill ink on a paper, it's not going to provide meaningful information. But information, going just one step beyond that, is not the print and the typing of the letters on a page. That is not information. It's the code behind those letters, right? That you learned as an intelligent person to read. It took you a while to read that code, right? Every child has to learn how to read a coded language, and it's it is not the ink or the letters on the page, but is the information conveyed by the code within those letters and those symbols.
Amen. That right there is a perfect response. And I also find those that are evolutionists or naturalists, they have an unsophisticated view of the DNA code as you're talking. It's not just a linear string of letters, ATCG, but it comprises multiple overlapping codes. It's four-dimensional. The information's nested. We can write books, right, Sal, that can be read forwards, but the DNA code can be read both forwards, backwards, and every other letter has a third embedded message in it.
The code of life, we're just scraping the surface, on how the code of life is embedded in the DNA. Like you said, it's multifaceted, way beyond with just a Morse code.
Right.
Way beyond that. We don't understand it all. I mean, you could ask the biologists and stuff. They're just learning. It's almost beyond imagination how the code can produce and direct life processes itself.
So interacting with evolutionists, they'll oftentimes attempt to hand wave away this evidence, Sal, by challenging the creationists to define what they mean by information. What would be a good way to respond to that challenge?
Gee, I do have. There has been several formal explanations or definitions of information. I've shown them on previous programs that I've done, but without going to a formal definition, let me just say it's a way to communicate between two minds, one intelligent source providing another intelligent source with directions or information or instructions of where to go, what to do, how to do it. It's instructions. In the case of life, instructions to produce life itself within your body. It's a communication system.
Right. Amen. a question here from the audience. They ask, if DNA mutates at a certain rate, can we use that to see how long humans have existed? Can we use that to see how long we can exist?
Yeah, geneticists have been working on this for decades. Yes, they particularly can do it due to the mitochondria within the cells, which are passed along, we believe, solely by the female part in the reproduction system. Your mitochondria, which are nanomachines within each cell, that produce the energy of life, the energy within the cell, basically. And because they're only passed on through women, it is believed, they can then analyze genes of various people of different ages and where they're located around the earth, and try to determine the mutation rate, the rate at which mutations have accumulated in there. And from there, they get a timeline going backwards to see how long life has been existing on the earth. And again, it supports the biblical record of life on the earth going back no more than about 6,000 years. And again, emanating from three families of women.
Amen. That's another age limiting factor of the earth, and yet through genetics. And so we can limit the age of the universe through genetics, astronomy, as you've shown, geology, biology. I just find it fascinating, Sal, in light of what you're talking about, that we've literally discovered our first parents, Adam and Eve, directly in our genetics.
Yeah. And the fact that man is not self-destructed already is an indication that he hasn't been being reproduced from some so-called missing a link that is an offshoot between primates, that is apes or monkeys, and human beings, that goes back like 4 to 6 million years. That's what we're told in evolutionary theory. Man has branched off from the primates about 4 to 6 million years ago, and that means we would have been reproducing offspring there'd be over 100,000 generations of people on the earth, and if that were so, at the current mutation rate, which is measured already, they have somewhat of a handle on it. At that rate, we would have self-destructed, due to genetic entropy. That's a subject on itself. But the human genome is deteriorating. I hate to say that, but it's a fact of life. It is not increasing, as I showed in that slide. We are not growing more robust and more intelligent with time. But the human genome has been shown by genetic research that it is conforming to the second law of decay, second law of thermodynamics, like everything else in this earth. And if we were around for these millions and millions of years, we would have already self-destruct. It's just like a computer that all computers start to accumulate errors. You have to correct them in your computer, or eventually the computer will just fail. What is the word for it when the computer just
Crashes.
Stops?
Yeah.
It crashes. That's
Right.
the word. It crashes. That's literally what happens with a computer as it accumulates errors within the system. And you have to correct those by various means. Otherwise, it will eventually crash.
That's a fantastic point. And I believe the reality of genetic entropy, mutation accumulation, precludes evolution from being true. Because as you put it, they want us to believe that we evolved over time, over millions of years, from primitive primates, ape-like creatures, but they don't have the time, since mutation accumulation puts shelf lives on genomes. if we had that much time in light of the mutation rate, we would have self-imploded. We would have reached mutational
We would have
meltdown or
crashed.
crashed, like you said.
Yeah, right. And you know what? Let's go back. We talked about a biblical worldview. What does the biblical worldview tell us about the number of generations? Has man been reproducing for over 100,000 generations? No.
No.
You can go to the book of Luke. It has the genealogy of Jesus Christ from his birth right on back to God, Adam and Eve, and then God. Okay, that's 4,000 years. It's 77 recorded generations from Jesus Christ to creation. 77, not 100,000 or 200,000 generations. You know what I mean? So the biblical record is in line with what we see with genetic entropy. That's why we have not crashed already, as the mutations keep accumulating in our reproductive cycles.
Right. Amen. Overall, we have few mutations that have accumulated in those compartments you were talking about, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down on the mother's side. And then you've also got the Y chromosome, which is passed down on the father's side. And every single male Y chromosome can be traced back to a single male ancestor of all people on the planet.
Amazing.
Exactly what the Bible predicts. So great point.
So which set of glasses are you going to look at life through?
Right. Yeah. And we don't require any far-fetched storytelling to explain this genetic data, since this genetic data flows directly from what Genesis describes as being the origin of humanity. So we just hit the 15-minute mark for this round, and so we got a few more minutes here for questions. Let's see this one. This one comes in from Mars Hill. Question for you, Sal. Do you think that God allows a level of ambiguity so that the non-believer's heart can be exposed? I believe if you peel the onion, you see intelligent design, but does he purposely allow some doubt?
I don't think the Lord, Creator, is trying to confuse us in any way, and make things ambiguous in any way. But in order not to be confused, to sort things out in this life that we have to study the Word of God. He's given us his word. And as you study that, all these things fall into place, you see. And so at that, like we're talking about, they conform to the biblical record, and ambiguity kind of floats away. That doesn't mean that by studying the Bible, you're going to learn everything about everything. You know what I mean? The Bible is not a scientific text in itself, but where it touches on areas of science, it is always found to be correct.
Right. You mentioned the Tower of Babel dispersal event in the first part of your presentation. Do we also have confirming scientific data for that biblical event, Sal?
Well, the genetics, the study of genetics points to the fact that there was a dispersion of people, in that it answers the question, why do we have people all over the earth who are obviously of one human race? There's only one human race, and our scientific investigations have even admitted to that now. There is no such thing as racism. There is only one human race, as the Bible tells us. But we do see different people groups on the earth with different characteristics, okay, physical characteristics within reason, but we're all human, of course, but we have different facial characteristics, color, so-called color of our skin, which is a misnomer. Everybody has the same color. It's some form of brown due to the chemical melanin, which is in the cells of your skin. It's a brown dye, you might say, or pigment. Everybody has the same pigment, but it's how much of it that is expressed in your cells. So everybody is a form of brown. As Ken Ham used to point out, I am not white.
I've never seen a white man if that's white.
Everybody is a form of brown. But going back to the dispersal at Babel, this shows that when the groups of people that were existing at that time, they think there was different estimates of maybe like a 500,000 to a people at the Tower of Babel at the time, maybe 1 million. But when they were dispersed into the many, many language groups, when you disperse a group of people, then again, you start to eliminate the combinations that are available to those people. And people tend to want to stay with their own kind, you might say, and as they reproduce, and people disperse, they tend to stay with the same characteristics because you've divided up the ability or the number of combinations of the human race that were available, but people just keep reproducing within their own group. That's what you wind up with. And genetically, this is supported. Genetically, it's called genetic drift, or right. A bottleneck, a genetic bottleneck.
Right, because you have uniformity at the Tower of Babel, and then you have this dispersal event where the languages are confused and different people groups migrate to different parts of the world. And like you say, what we see in terms of shades of skin, genetically, we see geographically specific Y chromosomes. And that is testimony to that out of Babel dispersal event where people groups become isolated, as you said, Sal, and they start inbreeding and intermingling with each other, and they become distinct in many ways. That goes right back to the Babel dispersal.
Oh, gee, wow. It conforms to the Bible of what the Bible says. It gives us an explanation, and the world will try to tell you have all these different races. No, there's only one human race, and that has been established just a few years ago, really, by when they constructed the entire human genome and concluded that there is only one human race on this earth.
Amen. And the Bible predicted it, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth. Another confirmed biblical expectation, Sal.
Yes.
Okay, well, that is another 20 minutes, and these 20-minute rounds are flying by. Sal, I could discuss these topics with you all day. And so I guess we'll move into your next.
We'll go to the next session. We are finding, ladies and gentlemen, original biomolecules recovered from fossils that are assumed to be as old as 550 million years old in the so-called geologic column. But the proposed age of the fossils is inconsistent with known principles of organic chemistry and physics. We are finding soft tissues throughout the geologic column. It wasn't that many years ago that it was claimed that these finds are just a one-off, but we can't claim that. We're finding original biomolecules, original organic molecules and tissues throughout the fossil record, throughout the geologic column. Is this even possible? Is it true? Here's a sketch of the geologic column from the Cambrian period. These are the fossiliferous sedimentary rocks which are laid down by water all over the earth and are divided up into various periods, as they're called. And you may remember the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods in which the movie, the Jurassic Park, became quite famous. They call this the era of the reptiles. It is not the era of the reptiles. There is every kind of animal and plant you could imagine are found within these rocks, along with the dinosaurs. You'll never see that, of course, in a museum, but that's another story in itself. But this portion, the sedimentary rocks of the earth containing fossils for the most part, is dated as far down as 540 million years. And we are now coming up with biological tissues and proteins and such from fossils throughout the geologic column. All you have to do is check it out. So scientists steeped in an evolutionary thinking worldview might argue that multiple discoveries of soft tissues in rocks that are so-called millions of years old actually provides observational evidence that tissues can last that long. But this amounts to a logical fallacy, okay? It merely what's called in a court, it begs the question by assuming the age. They're assuming the age, and they're saying by finding these finds throughout the geologic column that the millions of years are true. It's called a logical fallacy. It will never hold up in court. The very premise is under scrutiny. So there have been many, this is just a very limited examples that I could put in this image here, but throughout the geologic column, aged all the way from relatively recent down to 550 million years old, we are finding soft tissue in fossils. We'll show a few examples of those here. Dr. Brian Thomas this was in 2011. So this is a little bit over 10 years old. He had found about 30 publications at that time, 10 years ago, that have now found original material that should not be there in theory, should not be there in these fossils. And he presented this at the proceedings of the International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh. But we're now down the line another 10 or 12 years, and I could assure you the number of research papers finding these type of organic molecules in fossils now have exploded. There's more than double this. There's over 100 research papers have been published on this. The secular paleontology struggles to interpret organically derived fossil material with suggestions that various models of taphonomy, which is how fossils are formed, have somehow preserved or protected the original molecules. So the best thing they could suggest to counter all these finds is that somehow, some way, that these molecules, organic molecules, have been protected and preserved for millions of years. The 65 million year old T-Rex started, basically, it was the main impetus for starting these finds by Dr. Mary Schweitzer in 2005. And she found flexible branching structures in the T-Rex bone and identified as blood vessels, and microscopic blood cells were squeezed out of some of these vessels. When she first found this, her own colleagues at the time suggested that she was completely wrong and that there's no way they could do this. But after many years of research, they cannot refute these findings any longer. The science of fossilization processes is known as taphonomy, but these finds are not fossils. Fossils invariably consist of mineralized, permineralized, phosphatized, pyritized, or keratinized soft tissue, or their soft tissue impressions, which occur as clasts or moles in rocks. In other words, they're basically, if they're not casts or moles, they're basically very hard rock or pyritized. They've changed to iron sulfide mineralization, etc., but not soft tissues. Cells are usually completely degraded soon after the death of an organism, right? After all the proteins and organic molecules within a cell, whether it's plant or animal or person, are made, they're produced through the DNA and the processes within the cell. So after the cell dies, how could the bone cells and molecules that comprise them persist in Mesozoic evolutionary dino-aged bone? Mary Schweitzer herself asked her that question and tried to come up with an answer, because she was so convinced that these fossils were millions of years old. Intact original organic molecules, bone cells, and soft tissue are repeatedly verified. And contamination or biofilms were ruled out. This was initially tried to discredit these kind of finds by saying they were contaminated or microscopic biofilms from organisms. But Dr. Schweitzer analyzed the bone from two dinosaurs, the famous T-Rex and a large duck-billed dinosaur, and found the same thing, these kind of organic molecules. It's not just dinosaur soft tissue either, though, but the presence of detectable proteins such as collagen, hemoglobin, osteocalcin, actin, and tubulin. All these are protein type molecules, a complex which are only produced in a cell and deteriorate rapidly. Didn't Dr. Schweitzer prove that iron can preserve soft tissue for eons of time? She did perform a chemistry experiment which lasted about 2 years, thinking that perhaps iron in the soil that infiltrated the fossils preserved the soft tissue. But this is no longer considered a viable possibility. Dr. Weil, PhD, nuclear chemistry of the University of Rochester, said this: what she showed was that iron can reduce the decay of tissues for 2 years. That's at best, especially since iron is not found in at least one of the soft tissue samples. Notice that there is no evidence of iron particles in the soft tissues found in this study. We also have other PhD chemists teamed up with Dr. Edward Bordeaux, a PhD in theoretical chemistry. They teamed up to analyze the chemistry required for Schweitzer's proposed mechanism to work. In the end, they concluded that the mechanism would have destroyed some of the chemicals that Schweitzer's team found in their samples, i.e., the suggested mechanisms seemed inadequate to explain deep time survival. Conclusion. The hypothesis is far from ironclad. That is the idea that iron could preserve these type of organic molecules in tissues. And can 2 years be reasonably extrapolated to 30 million times into the future? Okay, the experiment that she did was basically took 2 years. Watch this video by Mark Armitage. I know Mark personally. He's a great guy and a tremendous microscopist, a person who works with microscopes of every kind, from small school microscopes up to electron microscopes, and fixes, maintains, and works with these, and see what he has to say.
I believe we've hit a nerve, folks. I believe with the soft tissue and dinosaur bones, we have hit a nerve, particularly with the old Earth, long age, people committed to millions and millions of years, because the average person on the street reacts viscerally to this. People get it. When you tell people there's soft tissue and dinosaur bones, soft, stretchy, fibrous tissues, and some of the beautiful soft cells that I've shown many, many pictures of, people react instantly to that, and they get it. They realize that's got to be young. I mean, there's virtually no explanation necessary.
And so by soft, fibrous, stretchy tissues, I mean these tissues that came out of the very center of the horn bone. Look at how this is like a piece of taffy. I can stretch it in both axes, and it's so resilient, it just bounces back to its original conformation. So how can this be 68, 70 plus million years and still retain this kind of elasticity? Number one. Number two, I thin section these things, and they're chock full of osteocytes, the little cells that populate bone. And so how can these have these kind of structures in them and be that old? And so here are some of these osteocytes. You can see they're beautiful cells, and they have these little thread feet that come off, these little filopodia that are still completely intact, and they're nanometers in size. So how can this kind of preservation be there on cells that are 65, 68, 70 million years old? It's impossible.
Now, another important thing that you need to know is that these dinosaur remains, these bones, are not fossils. Okay, they're not fossils, they are bones. They're still bones. And how do I know that? Because they react to conventional bone processing. They react to the same dissolution of bone mineral that hospital laboratories perform all over the country today, using EDTA to dissolve bone mineral to have access to the soft tissues that are in those bones. That's used every day all around the planet. And so these dinosaur remains are responding to that, which means they're still bones. They have not been fossilized, which is astounding because the bone mineral has been sitting there in the dirt, in the water, in all the things that are found in the environment, and yet they were never replaced. Their bone minerals were never replaced with the hard stone minerals that we've been told are actually what fossils are made of. So these are not fossils, folks. They're real bones. They're tissues just like your bones are. If they were old, if they were 65 million years old, they'd be hard rock. You see, they'd be hard rock, and they're not. They are actual bone mineral that respond to the treatment that we put them in.
Definition of great faith: believing organic molecules can survive intact for 100 million years. Okay. And Mary Schweitzer herself has published in the Journal of Science methods of manipulating and processing these type of fossils in order to extract the soft tissues and vessels, etc., from them. Here's just a few examples. I'm going to go through them very rapidly. so we could leave time for questions and answers. Here is a fossilized fish eye in which the rods and cones are preserved for 300 million years. I'm going to be taking you down the geologic column as they get older and older. Do you know what the rods and cones are on the back of your eye and the retina of your eye? Those cells which give you sight. Do you think they're still in existence for 300 million years? Fossils from this area are remarkably well preserved because they were buried very quickly in sediments in the lagoon. That's the standard answer. Tanaka said that the gills and pigments on other parts of the fish were also preserved. Of course, they were buried rapidly. They have to be. All fossils around the world, found around the world, indicate that they were buried rapidly by a worldwide event because they're found all around the world in all the different sedimentary rocks. But whether or not they've been sitting there for millions of years is another story. The actual color pigments for 66 million years old, supposedly, dinosaur eggs. A German team from the University of Bonn conducted chemical separation techniques to isolate the original dinosaur egg pigments. We actually have the original colors on some of these. Their carbon and nitrogen containing chemical rings include plenty of double bonds. These bonds certainly can't last forever. This is a picture of the bonds that produce the pigments within these eggs. You can see these are very delicate bonds, and they're still available today to be seen. Nothing that we know of in physical chemistry will allow these bonds to continue for millions of years without being destroyed. Complicated chemical rings and double bonds tend to break apart into smaller, simpler molecules. How could they stay intact for hundreds of thousands of years, let alone millions of years? And so we have a 340 million year old fossil crinoids. Those are like sea lilies. They're very delicate fossils. The fact that they're so well preserved is amazing in itself. But now, published from Ohio State University, the colors from the original pigment molecules have somehow lasted for hundreds of millions of years. They concluded that organic molecules are preserved in and can be extracted from Mississippian crinoid fossils. That is the geologic age, if I remember right, of around 200 to 300 million years old. The fossil molecules are a form of aromatic and or polyaromatic quinones, similar to modern echinoderm pigments. So they could be identified, these pigments, as similar to what we have today. The oldest multicellular animals on the earth were discovered, but the original tissue is still pliable after 1/2 billion years. These are down at the bottom of the sedimentary column, supposedly to be on the order of 550 million years. They're called tube worms or beard worms, similar to that of an existing group of animals known as beard worms that are in existence today. So actually, this is a living fossil. They have found indicating no evolution for the so-called 550 million years. It's basically a living fossil. Beard worms are living on the ocean floor today, and these there's videos on them and such showing that they have original tissue. They're stretchable and pliable today in the fossil record. Sylvan maintains that all biochemicals decay to the point that they are no longer recognizable or detectable in their original forms on the order of hundreds or perhaps thousands of years at the most, assuming reasonable Earth surface temperatures. Briggs and Crowther, similarly noted paleontologists Briggs and Crowther, discussed exceptionally preserved fossils, writing, DNA is highly susceptible to hydrolysis, that is being broken up by water, and oxidation, and there are no reliable traces in fossils much more than 50,000 years old. Proteins also decay rapidly and are usually only preserved at a time scale similar to that of DNA. So he's stretching the point to perhaps 50,000 years, but we're nowhere near these hundreds of millions of years old. So let's just use some logic here, right? Pure logic, no emotions involved. Because original and unmineralized soft tissues have been found in fossils conventionally dated as millions of years old, and since chemical analysis confirmed that these have not been diagenetically altered, that means turned to rock, they haven't been turned to hard rock, then logically, Captain, that means these supposed fossils that are millions of years old, they contradict Briggs' expectation that no original biochemistry should be found in fossils since they fail to preserve long-term. So we have a whole number of reputable scientists that tell us that there's basically no way that we can preserve original biochemicals and soft tissue and cells for these long periods of time. So to summarize, organic tissue is synthesized and maintained by the complex functioning systems of living cells. Information. The worldwide existence of unquestionable original endogenic biomolecules associated with fossils appears to negate the evolutionary-based assignments, or alternately strongly challenge the purported deep time of the geologic column. Maintaining the evolutionary paradigm would require the following improbable explanatory scenario for every one of these finds, okay? They would have had to do this. They would have to avoid rapid inundation and sequestering from scavengers, avoid drainage of interstitial water, preventing accelerated biodegradation, long-term protection from common geologic processes such as geomorphic surface erosion, chemical weathering, erosion, elevated heating from volcanic and plutonic activity, okay, geologic processes on the first surface of the Earth. They would have had to avoid that. They would have had to avoid environmental sterilization from bacteria. And even though the longevity of many biomolecules is uncertain, it is unreasonable to believe that these tissues could survive all these things, including the spontaneous disaggregation of molecular bonds due to the relentless and pervasive second law of thermodynamics over geologic time. Simply stated, everything falls apart and decays and moves to its most random state. So here we are finding these throughout the sedimentary column. So if you'd like to have some questions and answers on this, we could do that at this time.
Sal, another fantastic presentation. I like that last picture of the geologic column and the soft tissue that has been found all throughout it. It looked like even worms back 550 million years ago. We're finding. So, I mean, this is very
Yeah.
contradictory to what the evolutionists are saying. Very good. Okay. Next question. I feel like you probably dismantled most of the objections and criticisms to the findings of dinosaur soft tissue, red blood cells, collagen. Actually, I've heard some evolutionists say, well, collagen can withstand degradation since it's very strong. And so maybe that's why we find it preserved. What would be a good response to that before we get to this one?
I'm not an expert on collagen, but it's just another protein that forms, I believe, a lot of skin cells and such, and I think bone. But all these molecular molecules, as we know, will disintegrate in time. You just bury somebody, and it doesn't take that long for it to disintegrate into dust. You perhaps, if it's well preserved in a coffin or something, or embalmed, it could last a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 years. But nothing really can exist that we know of for these lengths of times.
Right. Even when it comes to extinct humans like Neanderthals, we find DNA associated with Neanderthals, and the evolutionists would say, well, they go back 500,000 years ago, maybe. And so how in an environment, even in a cave setting, can DNA be preserved for that long?
Well, the finest scientists, I just showed a few, say they can't.
Right. Exactly. Now, if the Earth is only roughly 6,000 years old, or going back to the flood 4,500 years old, then that makes sense.
That's in the realm of possibility under rapid burial scenarios of the worldwide flood where they're rapidly buried.
Right. Now, finding DNA and soft tissue and red blood cells, collagen, is it oftentimes going to be dependent, even from our own position, Sal, the young Earth creation position? Is it going to be dependent on environmental conditions, if the environment actually allows for that kind of preservation?
Well, everything we know on the surface of the Earth, the environment deteriorates organic material. What if it's especially water? DNA and these organic molecules are hydrolyzed. That means the water causes their bonds to fall apart. So you have to keep them dry. You have to keep them away from the bacteria, from the scavengers, and then just the processes of the environment. We find a lot of these dinosaur bones, and they're not necessarily hundreds of feet underground. They dig them up near the surface of the Earth, and they're supposedly sitting there for like 1 million years on the surface of the Earth. The environment again of erosion, the sun, the rain, etc., should have destroyed them.
I've had evolutionists ask me, okay, why do we find DNA in Neanderthals, but not in Australopithecines? And it brings me back to the environmental point that Neanderthals existed in cold ecoglacial environments, which would be more suitable for preservation. Australopithecines like Lucy lived in Africa and lived in grasslands and woodlands and so on and so forth, that hotter conditions basically that would not be as suitable for preservation of DNA. Would that be a good response, Sal, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. The environment plays a big part in that. You could see from the biblical record that the plot of longevity that I showed, the largest drop occurred almost immediately after the flood, because we believe the environmental conditions on the Earth changed quite a bit, to the point that it wasn't conducive to maintain those long ages, the long life of people that existed pre-flood. and there was a very rapid drop, of course, with the magnetic field of the Earth decreasing, and that's one of the things. And then, of course, you have accumulation of mutations, and we believe that after the flood, concerning how the environment affects longevity and such, you have the fact that we believe the atmospheric pressure dropped, that there was a higher atmospheric pressure and a higher percentage of oxygen in the air. And we know as pilots that the pressure of the atmosphere is actually more important to maintaining your consciousness as you go to altitude than it is the percent of oxygen that you're receiving. Okay. Because the pressure is needed to drive oxygen from your lungs into the bloodstream. That's why they have hyperbaric chambers now in hospitals, which they've learned. So the environment has a lot to do with longevity, which of course would also have a lot to do with the preservation of these organic molecules after the organism dies.
Right. And you mentioned hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and even the conventional literature is pointing out that these oxygen chambers help with the immune system. They help fight various diseases, neurological diseases. And so if the pre-flood world was in many ways a worldwide hyperbaric oxygen chamber, could that not explain the increased longevity and maybe even some of the size of the creatures we find in the fossil record, Sal?
Yeah, right. The sizes of the fossils of organisms, insects and birds and various fossils were quite large pre-flood. We have that from the fossil record.
You could wake up in the morning, take a deep breath, and you're good to go for the rest of the day. You don't even need a cup of coffee. So going to this question here on the screen, some skeptics say that this rescue device, I think, was more employed years ago. Now they've moved on to the iron preservation hypothesis. But regardless, some skeptics still do use this. And they'll say that the preserved blood vessels are rather biofilm, which is essentially recent bacterial action taking place. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the idea that they thought that these findings that they were finding initially, the first few that like Mary Schweitzer found and a few others were just simply looking at biofilms. That's a film, an organic film that's left by bacteria on things. That slimy film you get when like you get various vegetables and foods start to decay, and bacteria produce a biofilm. Well, microbiologists know what these biofilms look like, what the bacteria have left over. They could identify them and such. And what is being found in hundreds of these reports now are not biofilms. These are real tissues, real blood vessels, real cells, real proteins of various kinds. This was an initial grasp at straws to try to explain some of the initial finds, but have long since has been rejected as a no response.
Right.
No viable response for this.
Right. I agree. Grasping at straws. And now that we've found so many examples in the fossil record of collagen, proteins, red blood cells, you name it, that explanation's overturned. Like if it was one isolated example, okay, sure, possibly. But now that it's so widespread, and so I think it's widespread because they accidentally discovered the soft tissue. And so now that they're actually looking, they're finding it all over the place.
Right. It's like a lot of discoveries, like the first guy to break the 1 mile run, do a 3-minute run or something. I recall reading the history of it, but it's similar. Nobody has ever run a mile in 3 minutes until the first person does it. Then everybody says, well, it can be done. Let's do it. It's the same thing with some of these discoveries. Nobody expected to look for carbon-14 in fossils that are proposed to be millions of years old, because everybody knows there could be no carbon-14 in those. But once they started finding it and showing that these fossils could not be millions of years old, then all kinds of scientists got on the bandwagon to look for carbon-14. Now they find it everywhere almost, It's the same thing. Once somebody makes the discovery, people want to, check it out, first of all, to see if it, if it's correct and can they duplicate it, and then do their own research. And then the research and the discoveries just snowball. And that's what happened with these soft tissue findings throughout the fossil record. I mean, everybody is looking for them now. And of course, we have the electron microscopes and other equipment now. Like Mary Schweikert has even published a paper on how to do it, how to find these now. And so the number of papers, as I pointed out now, I believe it exceeds more than 100 finds, published research finds.
Right. So it's not only the dinosaur soft tissue that this logic applies to, but the C14 in diamonds. And you've talked about this and presented on this: coal, fossilized wood. And so they go into these things, assuming that the Earth is billions of years old. And so, of course, we're not going to find C14.
So they didn't look for it.
Right. And so, but now that they're actually looking for it, they find it. They find these things by accident, and they turn out to be widespread. I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on those that argue the C14 found in specimens supposedly millions of years to billions of years old in the case of diamonds is simply due to contamination? Do you think that's a viable rescue device?
Well, when they take these samples to these labs, these laboratories have to contend with that idea that they have to make sure that what they're finding in the fossils is not just contamination, that C14 entered from external sources. And they have ways now of checking and double checking and triple checking that which they're finding that can only be contributed to actual in situ C14 and not contamination. I'm not totally familiar with all the methods that they use now, but most of all these ideas of contaminated samples have been shown to be discarded. They're not contaminated. What they're finding is the actual C14 within the samples, and it's not due to the equipment error. That was also an issue that is brought up, that some of the C14 was due to contamination of the equipment that they're using, and they've overcome those objections now also.
Yeah, great response. They subject, from my understanding, those samples to really harsh acid related treatments in order to make sure, like you said, that the C14 found is intrinsic to the sample itself. So here's a question, Matthew Farrell, I appreciate it. He challenges the young Earth creation interpretation of C14 in diamonds. He asks, the carbon-14 in diamonds is as a result of nuclear decay, though, isn't it?
Well, diamonds consist solely, basically solely of carbon. And as far as I know, there's no nuclear decay process of carbon that's going to produce C14, carbon-14. So the carbon of a diamond is not subject, is not in itself an isotope, an unstable isotope that's decaying. the idea that of nuclear, that the C14 they're finding is a product of some kind of decay process within the diamond, I think it's been pretty much ruled out.
Well, we get C14 from the atmosphere, don't we? Cosmic ray
Yeah.
bombardment in the atmosphere.
Right. C14 occurs from nitrogen being bombarded by the shortwave radiation
Right.
from the sun in the atmosphere, and it turns the nitrogen into carbon, an isotope of carbon, C14.
And so we're constantly replenishing that C14 because we're eating plants, eating animals that are eating plants. But once we die, that's when the C14, there's no more C14 incoming, right? So then it
Right.
starts essentially. Okay, so to the critic, then you have diamonds like you're talking about, Sal, that are supposedly billions of years old, but they're found deep within the earth. And so they should be resistant to any cosmic ray bombardment, correct?
I would imagine so,
Yeah.
because diamond being the hardest substance that we know of, the structure, the molecular structure of carbon is such that it is so tight that nothing can get in there to contaminate it. It is so tight, so well bound. That's why we use diamonds, is the hardest known substance that we know on the earth.
Right.
And we use diamonds to cut metal, to cut glass. Diamonds can cut through everything, but nothing can cut a diamond.
Right.
Nothing can cut a diamond or penetrate through that structure. You can't cut it because the structure is so hard and so tight. You really can't contaminate a diamond. That's why it's used in drills, all your diamond drills, and for cutting glass and everything else.
And so if it's the hardest substance on earth, like you're saying, then it should be the most resistant to to environmental contamination.
Yeah, the contamination.
Yeah.
To try to get anything through the lattice structure of carbon in a diamond. See, all molecules, all compounds and molecules have internally what they call a molecular lattice configuration structure. And most minerals and stuff have room in that structure for other elements of a similar size to contaminate them. That is true, to a very minor extent, to get within the structure. But diamonds, as far as I know, there's no way to really get anything through the diamond structure. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the hardest substance on earth.
Right. So if it comes down to the law of parsimony, what's the most parsimonious explanation? It's that these diamonds are not really billions of years old. They're just thousands of years old, like the dinosaur soft tissue and Neanderthal DNA.
Right.
Yeah. So it's all a convenient coincidence for evolutionists, but to the biblical creationists like us, brother, it's expected. Okay. Well, so next question that comes in here is from the questioner here, the slave of Christ. Thanks for your question. How do you think the pyramids were built? Were they built before the flood or after?
Yeah, a lot of people are confused about that. They say, well, the pyramids, are those a pre-flood? No, they're not. The pyramids have been shown over and over again to be built from limestone rock that is quarried. They know where the quarries were, where they got these stones, where they quarried them and shaped them, which is miraculous almost in itself, how accurately they are able to quarry them and shape them to show the intelligence of man in the past. Okay, man was extremely intelligent. There's hundreds of examples of that around the earth, that he has constructed things and made things that today we can't even figure out how they've done it. But that's another story. But the pyramids themselves are made of sedimentary rock that was formed and laid down during the flood. Limestone, they're primarily limestone rocks, I believe. and they're post-flood rock quarry sediments that were formed post-flood. So the pyramids were built, as we know, post-flood. No doubt after the dispersion from Babel. These people are very smart. I mean, they tried to build, a structure to reach the skies, and they're capable of doing that if God would have let them continue. But when they dispersed, Egypt was one of the first civilizations that these people migrated to and started building these pyramids, along with China and some of these other countries. They were some of the earliest civilizations that started to build from the post-Babel dispersion. But those pyramids are built on post-flood rocks that were laid down during the flood, the worldwide flood.
A very good, detailed, and important answer, Sal, to a good question. So this next one comes in. It's a follow-up to what we were just talking about. I could briefly answer it, and then we'll get your thoughts too, Sal, as I've looked into this. Matthew Farrell, appreciate it. He says, it's other radioactive isotopes near the diamond decaying, and the radiation interacts with the diamond. The rate team that you're familiar with, Sal, they looked into this. They estimated that you would need over 13,000 times more nuclear material in the nearby rocks in order to adequately recharge the C14 that we actually find in these diamonds. Any thoughts on that, Sal?
No, not really, except that, again, diamond is not going to be contaminated by anything that we know of. And so it says, are there other radioactive isotopes near the diamonds? I'm not an expert on this, but I don't believe there's anything that we know of that could actually basically penetrate a diamond and contaminate it.
Right. And for sake of argument, to entertain that point, is many qualified researchers and scientists looked into this and said that you would need far too much material to recharge what we see, to the point where it's unrealistic amounts. So I think it goes back to what we were saying. What's the most parsimonious explanation? The diamonds are simply not billions of years old. Okay, well, this is good. This has been very comprehensive. It looks like in terms of Q&A time, we've got just a couple more minutes. Sal, time always flies by with you, my brother. You did a great job tonight. So we'll wrap it up with one, maybe two more questions. Jason Cole asks, how do 12,000-year-old civilizations fit into the biblical time age?
Well, you have to ask the question when you get archaeologists, attempting to date these civilizations, which they uncover various structures and evidence of previous civilizations. What method are they using to date them? I mean, they're coming from a set of glasses, a worldview glasses, that they have lenses that they're looking through, with the presupposition that the Earth is millions of years old and man's been evolving, for millions of years. So how did they come up with the 12,000-year-old age in the first place? The Bible shows us from the biblical record that the flood ended about 4,600 years ago. And so any civilization which we find on the earth, even buried, superficially in the sediments and rocks now, is no older than 4,600 years. It doesn't fit in. 12,000 years does not fit into the biblical timeline. And all the evidence we have from geology, looking at the structure of the rocks, the material within the rocks, the fossils within the rocks, the overall landforms that we see around the earth, indicate that they were rapidly formed during a worldwide flood and the flood waters that receded off of the earth at the time and produced the remnants of erosion that we see around the earth today. Of course, that's a whole study in itself, which I think we covered to some extent in previous presentations. So the biblical record is reinforced by the geologic record that we see on the earth.
Well said. We've discussed throughout the night a lot of direct lines of evidence in genetics. For example, you've pointed to mitochondrial DNA that with the mutation rate, low variation, we have last mitochondrial DNA ancestor who lived just thousands of years ago. Same thing with the Y chromosome. This is a direct measure of age, but archaeology requires a lot of assumptions, many of them just completely unknowable assumptions.
Yeah, many of the ages that archaeologists come up with are highly dependent on what they believe is C14 dating of the samples and stuff they find. And it's been shown over and over again by creation scientists that you cannot get definitive dates from C14. You can get maybe perhaps an approximate date, but you can't get definitive dates from C14 samples. But archaeologists use C14 dating methods as like a Bible to them.
Right. And the further we go back in time, basically, the more carbon dating would have to be calibrated, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. Great questions here from the audience. And maybe we'll wrap it up with this one, Sal. And you've done full presentations here on the compromised positions like gap theory, old earth creation, theistic evolution, progressive creation. And so Doki Doki, excuse me, asks, can a Christian marry the Genesis account and the secular origins theory together?
Well, I don't see how you can, because the Genesis account tells us that man started from one man and one woman. Then there was a worldwide flood. It was eliminated down to 3 families, etc. And it has a timeline of Earth history. Secular origin says man's been evolving and departed from some kind of a common ancestor from the primates between 4 and 6 million years ago. So the two are diametrically opposed to each other. And if you line them up, as I have in the past, secular theory against the Bible, you see the two are totally incompatible. You cannot fit the two together. They simply won't mix, intermingle, and you can't mix the secular theory of origins and the universe with the biblical record. There are some denominations called theistic evolution who try to mix evolution, biologic evolution into the Bible, but if you look at it, they're totally incompatible.
Right. The Bible's clear. Eve is the mother of all living. Adam is the first man. God created 2 people. Adam and Eve are first parents, the first couple, separate from any other form of life. That includes the chimpanzee. That includes a banana plant. And so we have no good reason to ruin a perfectly good book, the Bible, with scientific theories that you've already demonstrated have been falsified. So these positions like theistic evolution, they're unnecessary. We've already discovered the Adam and Eve in our genetics, as you've demonstrated. And you mentioned 3 reproducing couples after the flood. We've discovered them as well. And so this corroborates the Bible's literal account of human origin, Sal.
Right. You have, God created life. He created life on the earth, and he did not use evolution. Evolution is a tooth and claw, survival of the fittest type of theory to propagate Darwinian evolution, and the creator, Jesus Christ, is. Does not use that kind of a mechanism, to produce life. He spoke life into existence.
He can do it right the first time. And from that starting point, as you've covered, because of the fall, degeneration, death, extinction, mutation accumulation has been introduced. And so we're going downhill. Second
Right.
law of thermodynamics applied to the universe and also applied to the genome with genetic entropy.
It does.
So we've got a lot of excellent feedback from the chat. Ashley Myers says, this has been great. Love Sal. Sal, you're a fan favorite. My brother, you've been a huge blessing to this ministry. Anybody who is new to the Standing for Truth ministry and you want to see more from Sal, I promise you, every presentation he gives with us here on Standing for Truth, they're all very comprehensive, just like this one. So please do check out his previous presentations on either the website or the YouTube channel itself, which are both linked in the description box of this video. So Sal, again, thank you so much for the work you put into these presentations and also the time that you give us for
You're
these
welcome.
shows. I'll hand it to you if you had any final words, final thoughts, Sal.
Well, yes, that we're in a cosmic battle for humanistic, naturalistic explanations for everything. The Bible says where sin abounds, grace will overabound, overcompensate. And in this last day, no matter how many pseudoscientific theories they come up with to try to explain the origin of life, the progression of life through millions of years, God is not to be outdone. So he has developed creation scientists and to expose the fallacy of this. But also we have Romans 1:20, which says that God's attributes, his divine nature, his power is clearly seen since the creation of the world by what has been made. You can clearly see it by looking around the world and seeing that it's a universe of design and order and information, which can only originate from a mind, an intelligent source. And so Romans 1:20 says, therefore you are without excuse. So no matter what false information is being provided, God has brought forth evidence to support the biblical record. You just have to be open-minded and look at the evidence from a biblical standpoint, and then things will fall into place and make a lot more sense.
Amen. Perfectly said. Great final words. It's always a pleasure, and I'm always thrilled to have you for these programs, Sal, because you're extremely well-rounded. We typically go about 2.5 hours and we discuss topics related to geology, astronomy, genetics, and biology. And so I always have a great time with you, Sal. To the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, as always, for all the questions, the feedback, the support. And also, I want to encourage everybody to share this around. Share it to your friends, your family. Share it around on Facebook, because we are here to defend the truth of biblical creation and spread the gospel message. We just want people to come to the truth. So Sal, again, great work tonight. I appreciate it, brother. To the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And
Great
Standing
being
for
here.
Truth. Awesome. Sal, God bless you. God bless the audience.